Hello, and welcome to another episode of Something to Talk About Live. My name is Greg Rokiski. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm PFLAG National's social media and digital content manager. As always, we're excited to bring you another great show for today, this one timed specifically for Banned Books Week. To kick things off, I'm going to bring our host for today and my colleague, PFLAG National's Director of Learning and Inclusion, Jean Marie Navetta on. Hello, Jean Marie.
Hey, Greg, how's it going?
Oh, as you likely know, this topic is near and dear to my heart. So I think this is unfortunate that we have this kind of conversation, but I'm also excited to give folks in local communities something to do.
I agree with you. I know this has been one of the conversations that you and I have had endless hours of discussion on at this point. So I'm really, really excited about this discussion. A little sad we have to have it, but so excited about our guests.
Absolutely. And with that, I'm going to disappear so you can bring them on.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Jean Marie.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jean Marie Navetta. My pronouns are she or Erika, and I'm the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National. Every single week, we get together to talk about something related to LGBTQ equality, and today is no exception. As Greg already mentioned, it is Banned Books Week, and we are going to be having a really important conversation about what is happening out there and how I can promise you it is affecting people where you live, regardless of where you live. So let me give you a little bit of background before we bring our guests in. This week's article, if you'd like to read it, it is a great piece. It actually appeared in the New York Times Magazine last week. It is called How Book Bans Turned a Texas Town Upside Down. Again, New York Times Magazine, Erika Hayasaki, who actually wrote the book. Wrote the article. It is a fascinating piece on what happens in one particular town when a book ban is pushed. And the book ban literally begins with a complaint about a book related to noises that people's bottoms make, teaching kids about their bodies. And it escalates to lawsuits and threats of violence and threats of closure and banned books. And it spirals very quickly out of control. The really horrifying thing about the article is that it is by far not an isolated incident. We are seeing this happening all over the country. And actually, just this week, PEN America released some new research on banned books in their report, Banned in the USA. And let me tell you a little bit about some of the top line findings, but you definitely want to check out the report. They said that in the last year, there have been 2,500 book bans in the United States. 140 schools districts have been affected. That is in 32 states. Of the books that were banned, 41% of them had content that was primarily focused on LGBTQ issues. The next greatest book of group to get banned were books that were written by people of color at 40%. An interesting little correlation to prove that this is not just about library shelves. PEN America actually looked at the books that were banned, where it was happening and how it was happening, and they determined that about 40% of these book bans were also tied to some sort of legislative or political action by state level legislators or local legislators who had a political agenda to suppress certain viewpoints, particularly conversations about more marginalized people. So this is not happening in isolation. It's not just happening in other places. It is happening everywhere. And we need to have a conversation about it. And we need to talk about what we are going to do about it. Certainly, you've heard us plugging PFLAG's Read with Love program, but we want to take the conversation even further. So I want to bring in our guests today. And we're going to have them introduce themselves to explain what brought them to this conversation. So I would love to bring in Ileana, Franklin, and Candace. And we have everybody worked. Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. So here's what I would love to do. Maybe we can go Ileana, Franklin, and then Candace, sort of looking at the way you appear on my screen. Could you do just a quick introduction of who you are and a little bit about your background that brought you to this conversation?
My name is Ileana Jimenez, and I use she, her pronouns. I've been a high school English teacher for 25 years. I'm now entering my 26th year of high school English teaching. I'm also a member of NCTE, which is the National Council of Teachers of English, and am the new incoming chair of the LGBTQIA Advisory Committee for NCTE. And we look at a range of issues within critical literacies and the ways in which queer literature, for example, is taught in schools, amongst other issues. And I also focus on critical feminist pedagogies in the classroom.
Thank you. Franklin?
So I'm Franklin Escobedo. I'm the current president of the Young Adult Library Service Association, which is a division of the American Library Association. I began my career as a teen services librarian, and now I'm the community services director, but I'm still very involved with my division. But yeah, I got into teen services because I saw there was a need, but also because I'm a queer Hispanic, and I wanted to make sure that my voice was heard when we were making lists and, advising and reading books. So that's how I got involved with the DALSA. So.
If you're not at the table, bring yourself to the table. It is the only way to do it. Candace.
Hi, everyone. I'm Candace, and I've been a teen services librarian for over a decade. I coordinate system-wide teen services at one of the largest city public library systems in the nation, and I'm also a past president of the Young Adult Library Services Association. Similar to Franklin, I came to this work because I think it's an essential part of serving teens in libraries and in education, just helping and supporting teens where they are and where they're exploring. And I think this is a really important part of that discussion, that support, and that advocacy.
Thank you. And thank you. I cannot say this enough. Thank you for what you're doing. I mean, we talk about sort of these everyday superheroes, and especially given the landscape of what we're facing, you are all very much are fitting into that group. So Franklin and Candace, I'd like to talk a little bit more about what brought you into wanting to be librarians. And I know that seems like a question that might be a little bit unrelated to banned books, but I think there's an essential connection here. What is it that created such a passion to want to do this for the rest of your life? And Franklin, maybe we could start with you and then go over to Candace.
Well, mine's funny. My mom was a librarian, so and it's really funny because I just grew up in the library, and I really didn't want to do this as a career. But then when I got to start doing teen services, and I realized that all the libraries I ever went to, where my mom worked, where I worked, they just weren't serving the teens. They had great collections, but there were no programs, there were no offerings. And most teens, even in my generation, were chased out of the library and never came back. And so I wanted to make sure that didn't happen. And that was because I wanted to be a curator, but then I just sweeped into teen services. And that was where my heart and passion was. And I sort of, changed my whole degree to focus on that. But I have this funny backstory. Growing up in the library is really fun, but I have a totally different experience than other people. So
I love that, and I'm a little bit jealous that I did not get to grow up in. My parents were teachers, but not in the library. Candace.
I don't have. Well, actually, I have an aunt who's a librarian, but I did kind of grow up in the library, like in the school library. I just spent a lot of time in libraries, and also similar to Franklin, I spent a lot of time in libraries in high school as well. And the staff were all really nice, but as far as I knew as a teenager, there wasn't a teen services librarian, or if there was, I didn't know who that person was. My background, actually, my undergraduate degree is in psychology with an emphasis on youth development. And so I actually thought I was going to be, a counselor or a psychologist, also, supporting teens in that way. So I always had that sort of tilt towards youth, and it just happened through a variety of strange coincidences that librarianship, kind of merged both that love of supporting youth as well as a love of reading, of course, and books, and was sort of like this I don't know, perfect storm of, well, why not? And also I have to say, just a commitment to, nowadays it sometimes seems that social justice can be seen as a controversial term. But for me, it was just like taking the passion that I had as a teenager, as a young person, for wanting to do what my parents taught me, which was supporting what was right, in the world for, everyone, not just one person or two people or, whatever. And I think this is definitely an avenue that I felt translated well for that.
Well, and you could have never known the world would turn the way it has to get you to make it so much of your job. And Ileana, you come to us from a different background. You were an educator, so you were certainly in this space. And what pushed you to sort of want to be in this space, to want to do this kind of work?
I just want to acknowledge that I think everyone in this screen is a person of color. And I think that without all of our backgrounds informing this conversation, I don't think it would be probably as thoughtful as it's probably going to be in the next 30 minutes, especially because we bring our full selves to our work. And I say that because my story has to do with being in the high school English classroom as a student in 1993 and coming and reading James Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a young man in my AP English class, and really identifying with Stephen Daedalus as a kid who was bullied on the playground, who loved to read and write poetry, who would question the church, questioned authority, wanted to become a writer and an intellectual. And I thought, this is a really powerful book. However, I don't see myself in it. And I didn't know where I could look for books that actually reflected my own realities as a reader, as someone who had been bullied on the playground, as someone who was questioning the church, as somebody who was exploring sexuality. All these things I wanted to know and experience through books. So I went to the local library, public library on Long Island. I'm from the Bronx originally. And my parents are from Puerto Rico. I see the Puerto Rican flag right behind you, Jean Marie. So I went to the public library, and this is the times of card catalogs. And I started pulling out the card catalog and like leafing through it. And finally I find this little card that says a word that completely, I didn't know what it meant, but something resonated, and it was the word feminism. And I thought, what's this word? I don't know what it means, but there's a whole section that is related to this word. And I went down, this is when they used to teach you Dewey Decimal, right? Like I went down there and found all the feminist books. And that's when I had this huge feminist awakening. And I realized then that what I was reading by James Joyce was actually also written by women. And written by, a whole range of women who I could actually discover in the library. So that's actually what opened the whole thing for me in terms of discovering feminism in the basement of a library and writing this long paper at the end of my senior year in high school and dedicating myself and saying, I want to become a high school English teacher so that future young people can have a feminist clique and awakening to not only feminism, but women of color feminisms and Black and Latina feminisms, and to look at the world through an intersectional lens.
I could not be happier at this very moment, because as I listen to your stories, I feel like, oh my goodness, there were other people having the same experience. And by the way, I in my senior AP class got obsessed with Portrait of the Artist. So I'm so loving this, but I had the exact same thing. Oh, this feels right, but it's not quite me. Where is me? And then I found it. Oh my goodness, that was like the best. You all have the best stories. So I'm getting way too excited because this is a serious topic, but it's so... The reason I asked that question is that I think it's always fascinating what got us to where we are now, because what you are doing is giving to other people in different kinds of ways. And I feel like everybody who does this kind of work in many respects is there to kind of correct something that didn't look right for them along the way. And I think that's one of the reasons it's exciting. So, this conversation about censorship is not new. It has always been around. All of us have been contending with it for a very long time. But we have definitely seen an increase in it. I mean, statistically speaking, ALA has been tracking it. PEN America has been tracking it. Maybe I can start first with Candace and Franklin. From where you're sitting, from your perspective in the work you are doing, is what we are seeing right now at all a surprise? Or did you see signs of this coming? Or is this very surprising? And maybe we'll go, Candace, we'll jump in with you first.
Sure. Like I have to say it was sort of a mix, I guess. I think it was one of those things where I was hoping that it wouldn't. I mean, this steep increase, but it doesn't entirely surprise me that there is. I feel I guess one thing that I want to say is, well, I just think it's just been completely, these attempts have been miscast against the staff that the attacks are aimed at. As now I'm a coordinator, but I was a frontline teen services librarian. In a community that had all sorts of folks. I'm in a big city. I'm in a big urban library, actually, and I this this didn't happen necessarily, I would say 10 years ago when I was a frontline librarian. I had families, I had parents who came in that made specific requests of the types of books they wanted their children to read, and I happily pulled them. We happily had them in our collections, and that was great, and no one is trying to take away that ability for parents to write, like, be involved and be engaged in what their children are reading, right? But when it becomes an issue, right, of course, is when they're trying to make that decision for other families, for other parents, for other teens, for other young people that they are not the parents of. And so personally and professionally, I feel very strongly that's not my place as a professional. That isn't anyone else's place as a concerned member of the community. That's great that you're concerned. You should, in my opinion, you should talk to those parents, right? And have a conversation there, like adult to adult. But if they're saying like, no, that's not the way that we do things in our family, then folks should leave it at that, right? And so I guess that's a really long answer to yes and no in terms of being surprised at this situation. I think it's becoming, I think it's definitely, I think it's a reaction and a pushback to fear, which I'm actually really sad about, because I don't think there is anything to fear from these books, from the conversations that hopefully they're eliciting in I just wish that people had more faith in their kids and other people's kids, honestly.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think that's a really interesting perspective this is what it looked like. I sort of saw it, but it is changing, and the way it's changing and the conversation is changing. Franklin, what about you? Did you see it coming? Were there sort of signs that there was trouble brewing?
I've always seen it coming, but I'm always surprised about the book they pick. And the books that they choose are always funny to me because, but yeah, this kind of censorship has been going on for a long, long time. I mean, there are books that you would just, someone doesn't like this book. But as an association, part of our, profession is to make sure that we're neutral, that we make a collection that serves everybody in the community, whether we believe it or not. And so we try to make sure that we do that. But yeah, I'm always really surprised when a title will get pulled and someone's read into it, that stuff that's not really there. And it's like, where were you going? And what was already in your head when you read this book? Because I read that book and I never saw that. And some of the books that are being challenged, like in Texas, was one of the ones I had helped give an honor to. And so it was really just, for me, it was frustrating because I read that book like several times, backwards and forwards, trying to, dissecting it. And then to have someone say that they were saying this, and I just thought it was hilarious that they haven't read the book. Read the book. Right. And that's what I always say. And it's like Candace says, it is fear, the fear of being and knowing what someone else feels. And that's what scares people. But I've always felt if you're a good parent, you have those values, give them to your children. And like me, I have all the values that my parents gave me, my grandparents. And it's always in my head, no matter how old I've gotten. It's still there, that little voice. But yeah, I just think that's a big thing. But as professionals, what I really don't like is that, like Candace said, the attack on school librarians. Because school librarians are more vulnerable because they are by themselves. They're usually just one person on a campus. And then you have this whole town going after you for just doing your job. And that for me is always what has been the hardest part. The American Library Association is there for those librarians, but it's hard. And some people just don't know where to go to get the help. But I've seen this, I think over the last year, is what really surprised me is people personally going after people. And that is like, and it's frightening because we help serve the public. And we have librarians also we have libraries in every type of library. And but we're serving everybody, and we want to make sure that a library has something for you when you come in to find it, and as a reader. But for me personally too, it drives me nuts because as a queer youth, we didn't really have a lot of books to read when I was young. We were reading adult stuff, and it was always depressing.
Everyone died.
Everybody was all the films are all depressing. But now we're in this golden age of great teen literature, and there's so much great stuff coming out there that is empowering people. And those are the ones they're going after. It's like they just don't want us to have a voice, and that to me drives me cuckoo. And it's like, stop it. Read the books first and really understand. But most of the times they're not reading the books, and they're just reading off a list that someone else gave them.
Yeah, I think it was one of the Texas bans. The legislator who proposed it was a ridiculously long list. Actually conceded he hadn't read any of the books that he was proposing. It's funny because I was actually going through the most recent list of the last sort of 1,000-something book challenges. And when you say you're surprised by which books are on there, I was surprised by some of them. And as I read, I thought, it's not the book they're banning us. They're banning our existence, and that's it. So, Ileana, I want to talk to you because you are an educator. You are with the students. You are seeing the impact of what happens when a student has that book that they are in, that they can see themselves, and they also, you know what it looks like when there's no connection. So, what is happening with what's going on there now? How is it affecting the students?
I want to read a tweet that I think can tie together some of the comments that have been made. I don't know if I'm going to disappear by looking at this tweet. But it's a tweet by Melinda Lowe. And she tweeted, I think just yesterday, as we hurtle into Banned Books Week, I want to say this. The book banning occurring across the USA is not about the books. It's about institutionalizing discrimination against LGBTQ+ and BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous, people of color people, institutionalizing misogyny through policing sexuality. And I feel like so much of what's been said across the conversation is that it's really not about the books themselves because they're not even reading the books, right? So it's really about a fear, I heard the word fear earlier, a fear of critical consciousness. So if you read a book that actually mirrors you back to you or mirrors other people who you love or who you want to get to know better as your friend down the hallway, that's going to give you some kind of consciousness about a reality that's not yours or is yours. And once you reach that critical consciousness, you're going to and realize that we live in a world where your own identity, your own sense of self is not supported or affirmed or acknowledged, or there isn't a sense of belonging and you feel excluded and worse yet, probably silenced. And perhaps there's even violence being done against you, then that's when you're going to want to make change. You're going to want to do school-based activism. You're going to want to go to protests. You're going to want to pass legislation. You're going to want to do all these forms of change and become a change agent. That's what they're afraid of. They're afraid of the domino effect of critical consciousness, which is exactly what I try to do as a high school English teacher, because it did so much for me and I wish I had that as a young person. So I really love what you said earlier with Franklin about the queer books that were around when we were younger, which is that for the most part, they were pretty sad. And I have taught a queer literature class to high school students for years. And in its first conception years ago, the students would say, these are great, but why is everybody dying? And I thought, oh, wow. And that feedback was really powerful. So the young people themselves said, we actually want stories that, yes, acknowledge these realities, but we also want new, present, and future. And we want to be able to imagine ourselves beyond death. And so they were the ones who asked for it. So I reimagined it as a queer love stories class. And it doesn't mean that every story, ends as if everyone's going to be necessarily happy or that there's a bow at the end, or that there's no reality. But instead, there's like, what are relationships? And we talk about sex. We talk about consent. We talk about rape culture. We talk about all these things that are really important. We talk about intimacy. We talk about all the things that young people feel that they're being silenced about. And we don't have to fear these things. We can actually open it up and have a better, more liberated world where love and acknowledgement of each other can be recognized.
I really, really love how we focused in on I think one of the issues that's here is that all of these books don't end with us dead or suicidal or unloved or exiled or something like that. A lot of these legitimately celebrate things, and they are stories about people with potential who are going places, who find their hurts, finds people like them. I read Genderqueer last year, and I remember reading it and thinking, oh my goodness, I wish I had had this book a long time ago, because even though I identify as binary, there are pieces of it that I thought somebody else thought that. And it was so exciting, even as somebody who is by no means a young person anymore, to see that. I thought how exciting, and then how miserable to take it away. So I'm paying attention to our time. We always have our 30-minute block to speak in. And I'm, of course, once again, regretting that we don't have 3 hours together. But this is what I want. So we try to end every single show with giving people something to do, because PFlaggers are nothing if not incredibly tenacious, dedicated human beings who will keep at stuff. From each of your perspectives, from where you are right now, given what we are all facing, given what you know and your experiences, give people something that they should start doing right now, some way to advocate, something to do that would be helpful from your perspective, and something preferably that goes beyond Banned Books Week. And maybe Franklin, we can start with you and then go Candace and then Ileana.
Well, yeah, I always think that, as someone who doesn't have children, we should be, and other people, I know a lot of my friends don't have kids, we should be paying attention to what's going on at the local school level. As much as we think that we don't need to have a voice in it, but we also need to advocate for those queer teens and queer kids that are still in school, because without our voice coming to the table and saying, hey, this is wrong, those kids are losing their voice. They're not going to have the experience they've been having, and it'll go back to the way we were when we were growing up, and that was not a good time.
No, it was not a good time. And I think you're right. Opposition has gotten very engaged at the local level. That's why we are where we are now. You are absolutely right. Candace, what instructions, what direction do you have for people? It's your chance to be bossy.
Yeah, I would second what Franklin said and really pay attention to those school board elections as well as library commissioner elections. Be aware, usually if they're running for anything, they have a website that states what kind of the issues are that they're focusing on. So it's actually not that difficult to try and figure out like what their sort of plans might be for why they're running. And also I would say a second sort of thing to help would be to like email or write your local like school librarians and your public librarians and thank them for stocking books by queer and folks of color, or hey, maybe some folks of color might actually be queer too, right? It's not two separate things, I'm just saying. Right, so and to celebrate that.
Thank you, that is perfect. And Ileana, you get the last word on this one.
Well, this has been such an honor to be on this conversation. I would direct people, if there are any teachers who are watching this broadcast, I would actually direct them to NCTE's page on This Story Matters. This Story Matters is essentially an initiative through NCTE where teachers can write a rationale for why they're teaching a particular book, books that tend to be challenged, like The Bluest Eye, Beloved, other books that would probably surprise many people, including like queer literature books. Like I've taught Fun Home, and that has been banned in many ways. So I would direct them to NCTE's The Story Matters, where you can write rationales as a teacher, or you can download the rationales for your own classroom or your department if you need to have a rationale for teaching a particular book. There's also a beautifully written Students' Right to Read position statement that's on the NCTE website. It's called the Students' Right to Read. It's really beautifully written, and it has kind of a long, it gives historical context on a range of texts that have been banned, questioned, pushed back on. Books including Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, which I have taught for many years as an English teacher, Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, which I've also taught. So many kind of essential texts that have been questioned. And it doesn't surprise me that these are all texts that center experiences of race, racism, gender, sexism, sexuality, homophobia, transphobia. These are all, and even The Scarlet Letter, written during a context of puritanical kind of communities. What are the ways in which women get silenced for engaging in relationships beyond kind of the heterosexual marriage contract. So I just I just want to say that, which is that these are the things that get silenced and surveilled. People don't want to change structural systems that essentially would dismantle power, right? Like white patriarchy doesn't want to be dismantled. That's why they're scared.
That is exactly why people are scared. They don't want to give up the power that they have that shouldn't be there the way it is. Thank you all so much. I always say to people, I wish we had more time. This time, I really think we actually go for a few more hours if we wanted to. Hopefully, we can have more conversations. Franklin, Candace, Ileana, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for everything that you're doing. We really, really appreciate you. And we will make sure we get all of those links that you've mentioned posted on the discussion series page. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, that helps us wrap up yet another week together. There's no better time for you to check out pflag.org/readwithlove to learn a little bit more about PFLAG's Read with Love program, which runs year-round, not just during Banned Books Week. Thank you so much to our guests. Check out the links that they have suggested. We'll make sure that those are on the website with this week's article. We will be back again next week with another great show. As we sign off every single week, remember 3 really big things. Run fast, laugh hard, and most of all, please be kind. If you need help, visit us at pflag.org. We will see you again next week.